Welcome to the Bible Book Club. Now, some of you have asked if you can give to the podcast, and for the first time ever, the answer is yes. Bible Book Club is officially a nonprofit, and you can give to it. So, what are you giving to? Well, we're rather simple in our structure. Heather, Buck, Haley, and I do this in our free time. That means all of your gifts will be used to reach new listeners. Currently, the podcast has grown by word of mouth and just $1,000 a month of personal funds used to reach new listeners through digital ads. But think about how much we could grow the podcast in 2025 if you gave and we doubled or tripled that monthly spend. Ponder the math and consider giving today so that we can reach more listeners like you. We will put the link to donate in the show notes. Thank you for listening and giving.
This is the Bible Book Club,
the book of 2nd Chronicles.
Welcome to the club. Last time at the end of 1 Chronicles, David had commanded his son to acknowledge God and seek him. Well, last episode in chapter 1 of 2 Chronicles, Solomon does just that. He gathered all Israel, marched them up to Gibeon, where he led them in worship and sacrifice at the tent of meeting. God was pleased, and that night he appeared to Solomon and told him he could have whatever he wanted. Solomon does a good thing and asks for wisdom instead of wealth. Well, God then gives him both. And Solomon got down to the business of building the temple for the Lord.
So the Chronicle has been retelling the exiles stories of their past so they can have hope for their future. That hope will rest on their faith. Therefore, the chronicler's driving passion is the temple and worship. The returned exiles must rebuild their relationship with God, and he hopes to kickstart this rebuilding with a vision of what the temple was and can be in the future. The temple was crucial to the covenant relationship. It was not just a building. It is the intersection of heaven and earth. It is where God chose to dwell among his people. And the chronicler pines for God's presence to once again reside among them. Now, the temple is the grander stationary replacement for the traveling tabernacle. It was a symbol of permanency and promise. God had given them the land, and they could now dwell with him forever in peace, just as Adam and Eve had in the garden, but not quite. They had to do a lot of work to maintain their relationship with God through sacrifice and worship, something Adam and Eve did not have to do. To remind them of that goal of a return to the relationship in the garden, everything in the temple was decorated with the Garden of Eden motif of flowers, fruit, and trees. Now, just as Moses furnished the tabernacle, Solomon will furnish the temple. Both the tabernacle and the temple contained the altar of burnt offering, the altar of incense, a basin for washing, the table of showbread, a menorah, and both had bronze artifacts in the courtyard and gold artifacts in the temple. The difference between the tabernacle and the temple was the size, materials, and quantity. Solomon kept the scale the same, but everything in the temple was bigger, and there was a lot more gold. Scene 1. Solomon provides the temple furnishings. The furnishings were not necessarily furniture. These were items for worship and sacrificial ceremonies. Nobody was hanging out in the temple. In fact, you will not hear one mention of a chair or a pew. The lay people were not even allowed inside the building at all. Only the priests could enter the building, and they could only go in the first 2/3 of the building called the holy place. The high priest was the only one who could enter the last room called the most holy place. This is where the Ark of the Covenant was kept. Around the temple was a courtyard. The courtyard was accessible to Israelite men for offering sacrifices. The daily sacrifices all happened in this outside courtyard on a massive altar. Now, there are many images online of a courtyard for women and a few other courtyards, but these are not mentioned in the Bible or in Moses or David's descriptions. Other courtyards were documented by other sources than the Bible that were written after Christ's death. But as this is the Bible Book Club, we will stick to what is in our book. All right, Solomon provided two sets of temple furnishings. Furnishings for the outer courtyard, which were all made of bronze, and furnishings for the temple, which were all made of gold.
2 Chronicles chapter 4. He made a bronze altar 20 cubits long, 20 cubits wide, and 10 cubits high.
So this is the description of the altar of burnt offering in the courtyard. The altar was about 30 feet by 30 feet and placed 15 feet high on a platform with steps up to it. It was huge. This temple altar was about 5 times the size of Moses's Tabernacle version of the altar in Exodus 27. But the purpose of the altar was the same. It was used for burnt offerings for sin atonement. If you were with us in season 3 of the book of Leviticus, you will recall that there was a lot of daily animal sacrifice on that altar. Solomon enlarged the water basins and the altar of burnt offerings, suggesting that he planned to expand the kingdom.
Verse 2. He made the sea of cast metal, circular in shape, measuring 10 cubits from rim to rim and 5 cubits high. It took a line of 30 cubits to measure around it. Below the rim, figures of bulls encircled it, 10 to a cubit. The bulls were cast in 2 rows in one piece with the sea. The sea stood on 12 bulls, 3 facing north, 3 facing west, 3 facing south, and 3 facing east. The sea rested on top of them, and their hindquarters were toward the center. It was a hand's breadth in thickness, and its rim was like the rim of a cup, like a lily blossom. It held 3,000 baths.
So this ginormous bronze sea is in the courtyard and replaced the smaller basin of the tabernacle in Exodus 30. It was enormous.
Was it like a big, huge swimming pool?
Huge. It was huge. It was an enormous elevated water basin just for washing. It is considered a great feat of ancient metalwork because of its size. This basin was 15 feet in diameter and 7.5 feet high. It was supported by 12 bronze bowls, 3 on each side, and it held up to 17,000 gallons of water. The water was used for the priests for ritual washing, and there were many priests and many daily rituals.
Verse 6. He then made 10 basins for washing and placed 5 on the south side and 5 on the north. In them, the things to be used for the burnt offerings were rinsed, but the sea was to be used by the priests for washing.
So he's really clear here. The 10 water basins on courts in the courtyard were for a different purpose. These were unique to the temple and not mentioned in the tabernacle. They were used for washing the utensils for burnt offerings. Each of these 10 basins was 6 feet wide and held about 220 gallons. The stands or carts that held the water basins were elaborately decorated and had wheels, although they wouldn't have been easy to move.
Verse 7. He made 10 gold lampstands according to the specifications for them and placed them in the temple, 5 on the south side and 5 on the north. He made 10 tables and placed them in the temple, 5 on the south side and 5 on the north. He also made 100 gold sprinkling bowls.
Okay, so now the chroniclers moved on to inside the temple. There are 10 lampstands. Like the water basins, the lamps get an upgrade. The tabernacle had just 1 lampstand. The temple gets 10, which makes sense. The temple is so much larger. The purpose of the lampstand was to light the main area or holy place. The lampstands look like candelabra, but candles were not used at this time. The Israelites used oil with a wick. The 10 tables are only mentioned here, perhaps because the chronicler assumed the 10 lampstands sat on 10 tables.
Verse 9, he made the courtyard of the priests and the large court and the doors for the court and overlaid the doors with bronze. He placed the sea on the south side at the southeast corner.
So now we're back outside to the large courtyard, which had bronze doors.
Verse 11, and Huram also made the pots and shovels and sprinkling bowls. So Huram finished the work he had undertaken for King Solomon in the temple of God. The 2 pillars, the 2 bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars, the 2 sets of network decorating to the bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars, the 400 pomegranates for the 2 sets of network, 2 rows of pomegranates for each network, decorating the bowl-shaped capitals on top of the pillars, the stands with their basins, the sea and the 12 bowls under it, the pots, shovels, meat forks, and all related articles. All the objects that Huram-Abi made for King Solomon for the temple of the Lord were of polished bronze. The king had them cast in clay molds in the plain of the Jordan between Succoth and Zarethan. All these things that Solomon made amounted to so much that the weight of the bronze could not be calculated.
So let's talk about Hiram-Abi, because he must have been like the Michelangelo of the day, because he's mentioned in multiple places. In fact, in our last episode, we read this.
In 2 Chronicles chapter 2, verse 13, I am sending you Hiram-Abi, a man of great skill, whose mother was from Dan and whose father was from Tyre. He is trained to work in gold and silver, bronze and iron, stone and wood, and with purple and blue and crimson yard for fine linen. He is experienced in all kinds of engraving and can execute any design given to him. He will work with your skilled workers and with those of my lord David, your father.
So I love that God cares about the arts, because this man was skilled in so many different artistic mediums.
Yeah.
And in 1 Kings 7:13, we learn that Hiram was from the tribe of Naphtali, where our chronicler states he is from Dan. Now, from Dan may not mean from the tribe of Dan. The city of Dan was located in the territory of the tribe of Naphtali. Now, the point the chronicler is most likely making with this information is that the gifted Hiram was half Israelite and half Phoenician. However, it is another example of a Phoenician intermarriage, which began way before Solomon. During the time of the book of Judges, the tribe of Asher failed to drive out the inhabitants of the cities on the Phoenician coast. The tribe of Naphtali lived right next door to the tribe of Asher. The result was intermarriage with the Phoenicians for both tribes. Okay, next, Solomon provides more furnishings for the inside of the temple building.
Verse 19, Solomon also made all the furnishings that were in God's temple, the golden altar, the tables on which was the bread of the presence, the lampstands of pure gold with their lamps, to burn in front of the inner sanctuary as prescribed, the gold floral work and lamps and tongs, they were solid gold, the pure gold wick trimmers, sprinkling bowls, dishes, and censers, and the gold doors of the temple, the inner doors to the most holy place, and the doors to the main hall.
I probably should have counted how many times the word gold is used in these chapters. It's a lot. So first, the golden altar is mentioned. The author doesn't give any details about the size of this altar. However, we know from Exodus 30 that the gold altar was the altar of incense. It was smaller and more beautiful than the bronze altar of burnt offerings in the courtyard. This altar was to be positioned in the holy place or main room of the temple in front of the curtain that led to the most holy place. Its purpose was to burn incense, which symbolized the prayers of God's people. Then the author mentioned the bread of the presence. Again, he doesn't give any detail. He probably assumes we are good Hebrews and have read Exodus and Leviticus. So the bread of presence is the table, and it will be put in the holy place, as will the lampstands and the golden incense altar. The table is for the purpose of holding the bread of the presence, which was 12 loaves of bread replaced every Sabbath, representing the 12 tribes who were under the constant provision and care of God. Then we got a repeat mention of the lampstands with some tools and dishes. And last of all, a note about the doors to the temple. They are partly gold. 1 Kings 7:50 translates this as the hinges or eaves or side posts were of gold. But 1 Kings 3:31 states that the doors were made of olive wood overlaid with gold.
And here's where it said that in 1 Kings 3, starting in 31. For the entrance to the inner sanctuary, he made doors out of olive wood that were 1/5 of the width of the sanctuary. And on the 2 olive wood doors, he carved cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers, and overlaid the cherubim and the palm trees with hammered gold. In the same way, for the entrance to the main hall, he made door frames out of olive wood that were 1/4 of the width of the hall. He also made 2 doors out of juniper wood, each having 2 leaves that turned in sockets. He carved cherubim, palm trees, and open flowers on them and overlaid them with gold, hammered evenly over the carvings.
So there's a little bit of confusion about what this might have looked like, because we're describing doors to the most holy place, but there's also a curtain or veil that separated the holy place from the most holy place. But I will say it does make sense to have both, if you can track with me, because when the door opened, the ark would still need to be protected from view by regular priests in the holy place.
Yeah.
So there may have also been a curtain that the high priest would walk around after he opened the door, or maybe even before, I don't know. Like maybe he opened the doors and the curtain was there, or maybe he went around the curtain to the doors. Who knows? The conclusion is that we can assume every door on the temple, whether to the holy place or most holy place, was overlaid in gold, and that the posts or eaves around those doors were gold too. That's the chronicler's point. Everything's gold.
Beautiful. Now back to 2 Chronicles chapter 5. When all the work Solomon had done for the temple of the Lord was finished, he brought in the things his father David had dedicated, the silver and gold and all the furnishings, and he placed them in the treasuries of God's temple.
So every aspect of the temple was carefully and elaborately created. The design of the tabernacle represented a microcosm of creation. The splendor of the design mimicked the splendor of the world God had created. It was a sacred space, and the precise and perfect dimensions gave a sense of order amid chaos. Just as God created the world out of chaos and dwelt with Adam and Eve in the garden, Israel had created a sacred space, the temple, a place of worship, a place of order, in the hope that God would dwell amongst them there. Well, the only furnishing Solomon did not have to make was the only original piece of furniture created under Moses' instruction over 400 years earlier, the ark. And it was once again time to move the ark. Scene 2. The ark makes a final move to the temple.
Verse 2. Then Solomon summoned to Jerusalem all the elders of Israel, all the heads of the tribes, and the chiefs of the Israelite families to bring up the ark of the Lord's covenant from Zion, the city of David. And all the Israelites came together to the king at the time of the festival in the 7th month.
The festival celebrated in conjunction with the temple dedication was the Feast of Tabernacles, which is one of the 9 feasts and festivals we covered in Leviticus. So we're going to put our chart of all the feasts and festivals in the show notes for you. Now, the Feast of the Tabernacles, also known as the Feast of Booths, just to confuse you a little bit more, commemorated the 40 years the Israelites spent in the wilderness. The people of Israel would gather and set up booths, they called it, or temporary shelters, for 1 week to remember how the Israelites lived for 40 years as they traveled around in the wilderness. It made sense that Solomon waited until this festival to dedicate the temple, because the temple was a visible sign that Israel had found rest and permanence in the promised land. And all of the people would already be gathered in Jerusalem to celebrate the feast.
Verse 4. When all the elders of Israel had arrived, the Levites took up the ark, and they brought up the ark and the tent of meeting and all the sacred furnishings in it. The Levitical priests carried them up, and King Solomon and the entire assembly of Israel that had gathered about him were before the ark, sacrificing so many sheep and cattle that they could not be recorded or counted. The priests then brought the ark of the Lord's covenant to its place in the inner sanctuary of the temple, the most holy place, and put it beneath the wings of the cherubim. The cherubim spread their wings over the place of the ark and covered the ark with its carrying poles. These poles were so long that their ends extending from the ark could be seen from in front of the inner sanctuary, but not from the outside to the holy place, and they are still there today. There was nothing in the ark except the 2 tablets that Moses had placed in it at Horeb, where the Lord had made a covenant with the Israelites after they came out of Egypt.
The reign of Solomon was the golden age of Israelite history, and the installation of the ark in the temple was the high point of that golden age. The ark, the temple, the promise of the Davidic line, and future Messiah, these were the essential building blocks in the theology of hope that the chronicler was trying to instill in the returned exiles. I don't know how the chronicler was going to get around the fact that they didn't have an ark anymore when explaining this to the Israelites rebuilding the temple, but he does. It's been lost, stolen, or destroyed at the exile. We don't know, even to this day, what happened to it. The ark was the single most sacred object from the tabernacle, and its movement was carefully dictated. We read of the death from improper handling of the ark under David's reign. After a failed attempt to move the ark, remember David had successfully transferred it from Obed-Edom's house to Jerusalem and housed it in a tent. Solomon and the Levites had learned from David's error, and the ark was successfully installed in the most holy place of the temple beneath those 15-foot cherubim. It sounds as if the poles were longer than the veil and stuck out somehow. No one is quite sure how, and I'm really not, because there's doors there too, so it's a little confusing. The ark's inventory included the stone tablets, but no mention is made of Aaron's staff and the pot of manna, usually mentioned with the ark, as in Hebrews 9,
where it says this in verse 3. Behind the second curtain was a room called the Most Holy Place, which had the golden altar of incense and the gold-covered Ark of the Covenant. This ark contained the gold jar of manna, Aaron's staff that had budded, and the stone tablets of the covenant.
But most likely, that staff was always placed in front of the ark, as in Numbers 17,
where it says this in verse 10. The Lord said to Moses, put back Aaron's staff in front of the Ark of the Covenant of Law to be kept as a sign to the rebellious. This will put an end to their grumbling against me so that they will not die.
Kind of doesn't make sense to me, though, because no one was allowed to go see the ark once it was installed. So having the Aaron's staff in front of it, I don't know. All right, with the ark and all of the items now installed in the temple, worship would no longer be split between Jerusalem and Gibeon. Worship for all Israel would be centralized in Jerusalem. Scene 3, the cloud makes a rare appearance.
Back to our story in 2 Chronicles chapter 5, continuing in verse 11. The priests then withdrew from the holy place. All the priests who were there had consecrated themselves regardless of their divisions. All the Levites who were musicians, Asaph, Heman, Jeduthun, and their sons and relatives stood on the east side of the altar, dressed in fine linen and playing cymbals, harps, and lyres. They were accompanied by 120 priests sounding trumpets. The trumpeters and musicians joined in unison to give praise and thanks to the Lord, accompanied by trumpets, cymbals, and other instruments. The singers raised their voices in praise to the Lord and sang.
This would have been a big scene. They didn't have special effects in movies like we do. So anything that happened,
there was no pyrotechnics, no fire coming.
No fireworks, nothing. So everything with this temple celebration would have been a big deal. So simultaneously with the installation of the ark, sacrifices were taking place in the courtyard. When the priests withdrew, and I'm sure with a sigh of relief that all had survived the ark transport, the Levite musicians began to play and sing. And remember, David had given a lot of instructions about all these Levites that were to sing. So this is like, having every choir that you've ever heard all together at one time to them. Because again, they had no music per se back then. They couldn't turn on, iTunes and just blare it whenever they wanted.
Yeah. All right. And here is what they sang, continuing in verse 13. He is good. His love endures forever. Then the temple of the Lord was filled with the cloud, and the priests could not perform their service because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the temple.
The ark was in, the priests were out, and the cloud filled the temple. The cloud, you will remember from past episodes, is the glory of the Lord and embodies his presence, power, and protection. The cloud is a visible representation of the Lord's glory, while at the same time covering God's glory. It reveals and it conceals. No one can look upon the full glory of God in this world. Now, we met the cloud often in our journey through the Old Testament. The first mention was in Exodus 13, in which the cloud guided the Israelites through the wilderness.
And here's what it said in Exodus 13, verse 21. By day, the Lord went ahead of them in a pillar of cloud to guide them on their way, and by night in a pillar of fire to give them light, so that they could travel by day or night. Neither the pillar of cloud by day nor the pillar of fire by night left its place in front of the people.
The cloud is a bit of a mystery to us. We know from Exodus 13:21 that the Lord was in the cloud. We know from Exodus 14 that when the Egyptians tried to attack at the Red Sea, the cloud protected them. We know the cloud appeared at Mount Sinai in Exodus 9 before God gave them the 10 Commandments. We know from Exodus 40 that the cloud of the Lord filled Moses' tabernacle just as it did Solomon's temple. And we also know that for 40 years, the Israelites followed the cloud. But then the cloud disappeared, or as far as we know it did. There is no mention of the cloud until the completion of the temple. For almost 500 years, no cloud. So like I said, when this cloud appears, better than pyrotechnics to them, okay? Back to our story. Imagine this scene. The cloud had returned. Had they any idea this would happen? Were they hoping for it? For sure, they had thought about it because when Moses completed the tabernacle, the cloud had filled it. So was this what they were hoping and waiting for? Surely, Solomon cried tears. He had to be thinking of his father. David would have loved to have seen this manifestation of God, just as Moses would have loved to have seen the promised land. Never before had two men worked so hard to fulfill God's desires. Moses to give the Israelites a home in the promised land, David to give God a home in the promised land. Moses saw the cloud of the Lord, but never the land. David saw the land, but missed the cloud of the Lord. The irony makes my heart ache for them. To have missed the fulfillment of the promises God had used these two men to bring about seems terribly unfair. Solomon had to have felt God's pleasure with the temple. God had chosen to dwell among them in this building. The temple was as close as they could get to heaven on earth. God's presence, power, and protection meant peace in Israel. Because as Solomon said, God has a place for you to dwell forever among them. This was the climax of Israel's spiritual journey, but we know it won't last. On the other side of every peak is a valley, and the cloud will once again disappear until over 900 years later, when the cloud appeared again at Jesus' transfiguration, which is retold in Mark 9, Luke 9, and here in Matthew 17.
Matthew 17, starting in verse 1. After 6 days, Jesus took with him Peter, James, and John, the brother of James, and led them up a high mountain by themselves. There he was transfigured before them. His face shone like the sun, and his clothes became as white as the light. Just then there appeared before them Moses and Elijah talking with Jesus. Peter said to Jesus, "Lord, it is good for us to be here. If you wish, I will put up 3 shelters, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." While he was still speaking, a bright cloud covered them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son whom I love. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." When the disciples heard this, they fell face down to the ground, terrified.
Okay, a couple of points. I do love that it says a bright cloud here, because often when the cloud appeared to Moses, it was a dark cloud. The other thing, you just got to laugh. I mean, why would Peter say to two visions like
Let me put you
Moses?
up a tent.
Yeah, look what you did. I mean, I just love Peter. Sometimes he fumbles. He just fumbles. Okay, the cloud's going to appear again at Jesus' ascension in Acts 1. This version is the King James Version, and we're going to read because I love it best.
Acts 1, starting in verse 9. And when he had spoken these things, while they beheld, he was taken up, and a cloud received him out of their sight. And while they looked steadfastly toward heaven as he went up, behold, 2 men stood by them in white apparel, which also said, "Ye men of Galilee, why stand ye gazing up into heaven? This same Jesus, which is taken up from you into heaven, shall so come in like manner as ye have seen him go into heaven."
The cloud received him, and the cloud will deliver him again in the second coming of Christ. And on that day, we will most likely weep tears of joy, just as I imagine Solomon did, as we witness the fulfillment of God's promise to us.
We've got merch. Great news! Bible Book Club sweatshirts are here, and they're only available while supplies last. So if you want to snag yours, go to BibleBookClubPodcast.com/store. They're only going to be available while supplies last, so hurry and get yours. And if you're enjoying the Bible Book Club, why don't you share it? And then you and all your friends can listen and discuss. New episodes drop every Monday.